Hey guys, this is Gaijin Hunter. The 18 Deviant monsters in Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate are fascinating. So in this video, I'm going to do a rundown of all 18 and share details from developer interviews in Japan to point out the visual direction, design, and gameplay differences that the designers at Capcom focused on when creating them. Some of these are obvious, but some aren't, and there's some really neat trivia inside here as well, so I thought it'd be fun to make a video of it. I'll also be using footage from my Meet the Deviants video, which I'll put a link for in the description down below. First off, you can thank the Nintendo 3DS for the fact that these monsters even exist. When the director Ichinose-san and the rest of the team at Capcom were designing Monster Hunter Generations, they knew that they wanted to leverage Street Pass in a meaningful way, so they came up with the idea of introducing a system where you'd earn tickets to go on special quests just for being around other hunters. This led to a desire to make those quests feature special monsters in order to make it worthwhile to engage in. Thus, the birth of the Deviants. The concept here was to take one of the existing features of the base monster and exaggerate it. Ecology-wise, these are no different than the base monsters, but like how animals with horns you'll see different variations in shape and size, these monsters would have specific physical changes, be it from the environment or for more specific reasons like the Deadeye Yian Garuga. In Japan, they're also called two-name monsters, meaning that they are called by a different nickname due to their appearance and behavior. The idea here is that the people living in the world of Monster Hunter would name these monsters based upon how they looked. So if a Nargacuga is more white colored and moved swiftly through the air, it would be nicknamed a Silverwind Nargacuga. Okay, without further ado, let's jump right in with the Deviants from Monster Hunter Generations. First up, the Redhelm Arzuros. Design-wise, the most striking feature is its red mohawk. The designers said that for their generation, a red-haired bear was considered the strongest, so they gave it striking red hair that stands on end. The idea is that the monster's silhouette also kind of looks like a delinquent, a bad boy so to say. Not only did they make the size of the monster much larger than normal, but they also exaggerated the size of its front legs and the spikes on them, which it uses to punch and swing at its prey. Gameplay-wise, this is the first Deviant that hunters will face, so they took special care in making sure to really communicate what a Deviant was, so it didn't move or act radically different from a regular Arzuros, but was definitely a level up. The funny idea of doing that powerful swipe and sending a salmon flying into the air was actually from the effects department late in the development cycle. Next up, the Snowbaron Lagombi. Design-wise, they added dark hairs to its body to make it almost look like a panda. The designers really wanted an armor set with darker colors, and they felt the darker palette would make it look stronger. They gave it bigger front legs so they could throw huge snowballs, and overall they even made it a little bit more fluffier than the original Lagombi. Gameplay-wise, while the normal Lagombi would just slide around mainly to move, the Snowbaron uses sliding to position itself for throwing snow. This is another reason why they made those areas in its leg and its back where it slides a darker color. While deadly, they did retain the cuteness of the monster. For example, if you throw a sonic bomb while it has a large snowball in its hands, it'll drop it on its own head. Next up is the Stonefist Hermitaur. Design-wise, the normal species is modeled after a hermit crab, so for the Deviant they wanted to base it off of a fiddler crab, which has a larger single pincer. The darker color palette with purple highlights was to show that its shell is tougher than normal, and to also make it look different. They also gave it a new shell to equip as well. Gameplay-wise, they focus on making the monster more defensive to take advantage of its much larger size and tougher shell. But they did make sure to make its inner flesh weaker, the idea being that the hand behind the shield is soft. For example, you can throw a sonic bomb when it puts up its guard in order to whack at its body. Next up, the Dreadqueen Rathian. Design-wise, the Deviant has a strong poison running through her body, so her scales give off a purple tint. The spikes on her body and tail are larger as well. They started out with the idea that she would use her tail to make poison puddles on the ground, and they kind of expanded the gameplay from there. Because there's the armor skill negate poison, they wanted to avoid making pretty much her only selling point be negated, so they introduced a new tier of poison called Deadly Poison. For attacks, they gave her more vertical attacks to make her feel like a stronger version of the normal Rathian, which utilizes a lot of horizontal attacks. Next up, the Drilltusk Testucabra. Design-wise, since the Testucabra already had an iconic jaw, they decided to exaggerate it and make it even stronger so that it can lift heavier and bigger boulders. They also enlarged the spikes on its back to give it a more overall spiky design, and the red and blue pattern is to make it more look like a toad, and to give it overall a more meaner look. Gameplay wise, in order to make it feel different from the existing subspecies which used explosive rocks, they just went for large horizontal boulders. They also made sure that it didn't chuck the rocks at the players right away. They wanted hunters to be on edge and not to know when it would chomp down to make those rocks explode. Next up, Silverwind Nargacuga. Design wise, they started out knowing that they wanted to focus on its tail attacks, so they gave it white spikes. They gave the wings a striped, almost owl-like design to make it stand out from the normal Nargacuga, and the reason why they went for white as the theme was similar to Lagombi. It's because that they wanted to make a white-colored variant of its armor, and that sort of drove the color design for the monster. Like a silverback gorilla, the coloring worked for the species as well. Gameplay-wise, the normal Nargacuga doesn't have that many attacks that could hurt the player when they're far away, so they added in the Silverwind attacks when it swings its tail. These act like sound waves, so it helps to show how fast it is, which plays into the ninja motif that the monster is supposed to maintain. The fact that it can cause bleeding is just an afterthought to maintain its personality. It's not meant to be an important gameplay element. Next up, probably the least hunted deviant of all of them, which is the Crystalbeard Uragaan. Design-wise, Crystalbeard is covered in a special tar made up of different minerals, so they gave it special crystals and rocks to stick out to show that it comes from different areas than the normal Uragaan. They gave it a more overall red tint, and the crystals were actually an experiment by the dev team to see if they can do them and get them to twinkle depending on the angle of the camera, not the angle of the light. Gameplay wise, the biggest change is the type of rocks it uses to fight, like smashing explosive rocks or ones that release sleeping gas. They originally wanted to change the quest type so that you would just get a lot of treasure from hunting it, but they ended up scrapping the idea mid-development and just focusing on its moves like the other deviants. They did keep a nod to this original idea, however, by allowing hunters to mine the remains of the sleep gas rock that it uses during the hunt. Next up is the Deadeye Yian Garuga. The idea here was actually a little bit different from the other deviants in that this one is to show off that this thing has survived a lot of different hunts and has seen a lot of stuff. So they decided to enhance the glow around its eye, and they increased the potency of its poison. To avoid it looking too much like the Dreadqueen Rathian, they went for green and yellow colors instead of purple. He does a good job at focusing the poison in its tail, which is why it has red spikes. And unlike the other deviants, which are larger than the base monsters, this one is actually smaller. Gameplay wise, they kept the monsters small and fast as they wanted to show that you don't have to be large in order to be tough. There was actually a time during the development cycle apparently where this was the hardest of all the deviants to fight, thanks to the insane anger and speed it already had, combined with even more speed thanks to the smaller body. Next up is the Dreadking Rathalos. Design-wise, they wanted to maintain the original design but to just make it feel a lot stronger, so they decided to add black to the coloring. They also added larger shells and spikes to the wings, and also made the shelling thicker around its face since it breathes a lot of fire. Its trademark is the design of its wings. Gameplay-wise, besides just being more aggressive with fire breaths, they added in the explosive breath to make it feel over the top. After all, this is the series' flagship monster. They decided to make it so that flashbangs were pretty much ineffective unless you break the wings first, which made it much more prone to attack from the air, which made it a more fitting choice for the King of the Skies. Also why a lot of people call him Spam Lord. Next up is Thunderlord Zinogre. Design-wise, they wanted to aim to have a more unified color palette because the original Zinogre is kind of a mix of a lot of colors. They purposely made the horns asymmetrical so that they look like a crescent moon, and they added in the red coloring to its legs, which is supposed to look like the claws are blood-stained from hunting its prey. Spooky. Gameplay-wise, this was actually the first deviant that the team made for Monster Hunter Generations. They wanted to make sure that it was not just a more powerful thunder element, so they added in variation to the actual thunder attacks and focused on large flips and rotations, as that is how the monster would likely respond to all that extra energy that it has built up from that state. Next up, and one of my favorite, the Grimclaw Tigrex. Design-wise, they gave the deviant larger and more powerful claws. The white-blue color you see on its body is actually its veins, so when Grimclaw gets enraged, they turn kinda reddish. While the developers feel that not many people may have noticed, when Grimclaw is enraged, it also gets a bigger pump, so its muscles become larger as well. They kept this to just when it's enraged, since the premise of the monster that it's very hungry and starving, so to make it buff from the default would kinda ruin the concept. Gameplay wise, to make it feel different, they really made the claws larger so that it would be more powerful when fighting close distance. They focused its new attacks on its claws, like pushing large boulders out of the ground, or slamming on the ground and causing explosions. And for the final deviant from Monster Hunter Generations, we have the Hellblade Glavenus. Design-wise, they wanted to make it feel demonic, so they went for black and red as the color scheme and twisted the horns and spikes on its body. To make it feel more menacing, they also purposely made its eyes red. Adding blasts to the arsenal also made it feel different as well. Gameplay-wise, they wanted this to be the most powerful deviant in Generations, but since Glavenus itself was new to the game, they really didn't want the gameplay to feel that different from the base monster, as players really wouldn't recognize the differences. At first they thought to have it enraged and hot the entire hunt, but that wouldn't be enough for it to be classified as a deviant. So instead what they did was really just enhance all of its moves across the board, from the way that it swings its tail, it spins, and does its fire blasts. Okay, now we're moving from Monster Hunter Generations to Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, which introduced 6 new deviants for G rank. They knew that they wanted the rest of the Fated 4 to have deviants, and they wanted to have Bloodbath Diablos as sort of the leader of the deviants. Then they knew they wanted 2 more, so they purposely chose one monster which was relatively new, and one which was an old-time classic in order to strike a good balance. For the new monster, they chose the Nightcloak Malfestio. Design-wise, this would be the first deviant that players would face in Generations Ultimate, so they wanted to set the bar high, and they wanted it to feel really different from the base monster to set the tone and expectations. They went for a head design which they said was inspired from the Mask of Zorro, since they knew that it would be able to disappear, and they changed the shape of the feathers and tail to account for its radically new abilities. Gameplay wise, they wanted it to be a rather tricky monster to hunt, so they added the ability of its dust to cause confusion, reversing the controls of the player, and it can also disappear. But for a gameplay perspective, this is actually an interesting one because they made it so that you can still see it when it disappears, which allows attentive hunters to hit the monster and score a long down if they can catch it. Next up is Rustrazor Ceanataur. Now, fun fact before I even jump in here, but Kojima-san, the producer from Capcom, said in an interview that the liquid from the Shogun Ceanataur, which it shoots out at you, is actually its urine, and that its design was inspired by the bugs from Starship Troopers. How cool is that? Design-wise, they went for a Glavenus skull for its shell, as the concept was to have a non-elemental deviant, but unlike the Stonefist Hermitaur, it would be aggressive. It uses the shell to sharpen its claws to razor-sharp levels. You can see the aftermath of that with the coloring. The blue and rainbow colors are the shine that is left over from the heat of sharpening it a lot over time. Its thicker legs are due to lifting a heavier shell. Gameplay-wise, they realized early that the monster could actually do the same spinning move with its claws that Glavenus does with its tail, so they incorporated that in the hunt and also added in the bleeding ailment. You can also equip a Gravios shell. When it does that, it goes for long distance attacking, and when it has the Glavenus shell, it goes for close distance. And now going into the rest of the Fated 4. Glavenus got its deviant in the first game Generations with Hellblade Glavenus, but the other 3 didn't, so for this one, the idea was to address the weaknesses in the original base monster while also bolstering its strengths. The first up is the Soulseer Mizutsune. This is very Japanese in design. The original monster's colors were that of a cherry blossom, and after some trial and error they went with the keywords of Oiran, which is a historically high-ranking courtesan in Japan with makeup of a white face but colorful red and orange clothing, and Mizuchi, a type of legendary Japanese serpent. They made its claws bigger and stronger and gave it a backstory that it's been blinded, adding in a foxfire effect to its eye that glows when it becomes enraged. Again, overall, super Japanese. I love it. Gameplay wise, they wanted to push the original concept of that monster, which is stillness and movement. From the start also, designers knew that they wanted to increase its ability to cause bubble blight, since hunters were generally able to avoid getting that ailment with the original monster. The eye idea with the foxfire was there from the start, and gives off vibes of the famous Japanese fictional character of Zatoichi, a blind samurai who is calm but can strike with furious precision. Next up is Elderfrost Gammoth. Design-wise, they had a hard time with this one because Gammoth was actually designed to be the largest possible monster they can feature in the different maps, so they couldn't make it any larger. After trial and error, they ended up going with white hair to show that this is a Gammoth that is an elder who has survived countless fights over its life. It is hardened. This is also why you see a crack in the bone of its head. Gameplay wise, they made the back legs tough since that was the weak spot of the original monster, and they wanted to encourage players to face it from the front. They gave it huge powerful moves but with generous tails so that players could scramble to try to get out of the way. When it does its Snowblower charge attack, they made it look like it was tracking the player just to add to the tension. And finally we have Boltreaver Astalos. Design-wise, they gave it a blue thunder color to set it a level higher than the green energy of the original monster. They added protective shelling to the chest since that was the weak spot of the original, and the crown of the monster is redesigned so that it can use its energy as sort of like a large energy blade when it's enraged. Gameplay-wise, buffing its thunder to a new level similar to what they did with Zinogre was the original plan. The original Astalos also had really tight attack windows, so hunters found it easy to just stick under it and whack away at its chest, so they made its chest a lot stronger. They added in some huge flashy moves as well, such as the energy ball that sucks in players, as well as the iconic energy blade it does with its head. This monster demonstrates well how the Deviants aren't about new features like the subspecies, but more about bringing out the strengths of the original monster. And this brings us to the final Deviant, which is the leader of them all, which is the Bloodbath Diablos. Design-wise, to give off a demonic vibe, because demonic was really the keyword that they were going for here, they gave it a large asymmetrical horn. The idea here is that one of its horns were likely broken off by a hunter when it was young, and it grew back and it warped away, and now the monster wants revenge. To make up for the broken horn, the other one grew larger and thicker. The red color throughout its body is meant to represent the boiling rage that it has built up. The legs are thicker as well since it charges more than the normal Diablos, and the tail also has that same iconic asymmetric design. Gameplay-wise, the idea from the start, in Inochi-san's own words phonetically, was to make it a badaasu, or a badass. A monster that is just over the top powerful and can hold its own against all the other elemental flagships in the game despite being a non-elemental monster. The idea was a monster coming up out of hell, and that's another reason why they had some of its hunts take place in Ingle Isle. It has several modes of anger it goes into, each getting gradually harder. They decided that while normally they wouldn't allow such a move in normal monsters, they let it have a roar and then an instant rush afterwards, which is kind of an unfair move in order to create a critical and dire situation for hunters. One of the reasons though that they did allow this for this monster is that this game had arts and styles like Valor and Adept and stuff like that, so you had tools to avoid this if you were attentive. And that's that. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed just walking through the designs for these 18 monsters. I'm really captivated by them. I find that, and I still play Generations Ultimate, but I really love going back to the Deviants and hunting them because they're really cool in how they took that original concept of the monster and just dialed it up to like 11. Let me know down in comments, who is your favorite Deviant, both from a design perspective and also just hunting in general. I'm kind of curious to find out which ones are more popular amongst you guys as well. And if you haven't hunted any of these, from a pure visual standpoint, which one do you find the coolest? All of these Deviants again are from Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, which is on the Nintendo Switch and often on sale on the Nintendo eShop, so I would definitely check it out if you haven't already. And overall, it's just a very cool concept and I love what they did. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and until next time, happy hunting.